Firstly, what is the meaning of the title Light of the Bhagavata? Bhagavata refers to two things. It refers to the Bhagavata Purana, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very well-known and very wonderful literary work written in the Sanskrit language, which consists of 18,000 Sanskrit verses, known as the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana. And this Bhagavata Purana, but the word Bhagavata also refers to the person Bhagavata, or the great saint or saints. There's many saints that have based their life around the teachings of the book Bhagavata. So there is the book Bhagavata and there is the person Bhagavata. Translating and writing commentaries on the great Sanskrit Bhagavad Purana was the life's work of our spiritual master, my spiritual master, the founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. His name there is written on the bottom of the screen. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. As I mentioned though, this book is rather unique. Out of all His Divine Grace's 80 or so books, this one was very interesting because this was written in Vrindavan in 1961, which was 4 years before Srila Prabhupada actually came to the West to commence the Hare Krishna movement. One day, while Prabhupada was living in his humble rooms at the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan, he received a letter inviting him to attend and make a presentation at a world conference called the Congress for Cultivating the Human Spirit. And this conference was going to be held in Japan. I'll read from the preface of this book, which explains how this got to happen. As most of the participants to the conference were going to be from the Orient, Srila Prabhupada considered deeply how he could best present the timeless teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavata, suitable to the Oriental people. Prabhupada chose to base his presentation on the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam for the presentation. And this chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 20, is called A Description of Autumn. And it describes the autumn season in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada knew that the Oriental people would be fond of hearing descriptions of nature, and that the time of the autumn season is particularly auspicious for them. So Prabhupada planned to present spiritual philosophy by giving examples from nature. This was going to be his presentation at this conference in Japan. So there were 48 verses in that chapter, and so he composed 48 individual commentaries, one for each of the verses of the chapter. Prabhupada's plan was to go to Japan, and before he did that, he was going to find a qualified Oriental artist to illustrate each verse. He also wrote directions from which the artist could design each of the individual paintings. He hoped that the paintings and the accompanying explanation would make an impressive display for visitors at the conference, and he also hoped that a book could be produced and published containing the illustrations and the texts. So Srila Prabhupada was very enthusiastic, and he wrote many friends and acquaintances requesting sponsorship for him to go to Japan. But unfortunately, Prabhupada could not raise any funds for travel. No one was able to help him. And Srila Prabhupada was thus unable to go to Japan and visit the conference, attend the conference, and so the whole project of the Light of the Bhagavata was postponed. In fact, at the time of Srila Prabhupada's passing away from this world in 1977, the Light of the Bhagavata still remained unpublished, and the illustrations had not yet been painted. So, fast forward to 1984, and in fulfillment of Prabhupada's desires, this beautiful book, Light of the Bhagavata, was finally published in English and in Chinese. I remember the Chinese edition was exceptionally beautiful. It was a large format book. And Prabhupada had wanted that there be illustrations to accompany each verse, and the devotees in Hong Kong at the time knew of a very famous Chinese artist who had moved to Hong Kong, and her name was Madame Yun Sheng Li. She was a renowned Hong Kong artist at this time, and her artworks were very famous all throughout China and Hong Kong. And she was very talented in the particular style, which is known as Gongbi, particular style of painting. So they asked her, could she please illustrate this book, and she agreed. In fact, if you go to the Hong Kong temple today, in the Hare Krishna temple, you'll see there's some nice paintings on the wall, big wall-sized paintings, and they also were done by herself. So the book was produced with these beautiful paintings, and today we're going to show you these paintings and read you the commentaries or the verses that go along with the paintings and speak a few words. Hare Krishna. So we'll begin. It's a meditation, so we want you to absorb yourself in the pictures and the descriptions. Verse 1. The arrival of clouds, accompanied by thunder and flashes of lightning all over the sky, provides a picture of life-giving hope. Covered by deep bluish clouds, and the sky appears artificially dressed. The thunder and lightning within the clouds are signs of hope for a new way of life. So the illustration here indicates that we living beings are compared to the sky, the limitless sky, but somehow or other we have been covered by the clouds of forgetfulness. Verse 2. The scorching heat of the sun evaporates water from the seas, rivers, lakes and reservoirs, and there is little water anywhere. The people become thirsty and always look overhead for rain, but in despair. Yet, just at the right moment, torrents of rain begin to fall everywhere in the land, even on the hard stones, and the land becomes overflooded. Verse 3. Attracted by electricity throughout the sky and driven by forceful winds, clouds gradually cover the surface of the earth to satisfy the needy people by supplying water, which is the substance of their life. The clouds bestow rains upon man as the mercy of the Lord, who is always kind to the needy living beings. So as William Shakespeare wrote, the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. Verse 4. After heavy rain showers, the fields and forests in all directions appear green and healthy. Thus they resemble a man who has undergone severe austerities for some material gain and has achieved his end. For such a man is strong, hearty, and good-looking. Prabhupada writes in his commentary that, quote, "The greenery of the rainy season is but a temporary show. It looks very pleasant, but we must remember that it will not last. We should not try to be beautiful like seasonal flowers or greenery that flourish in the rainy season but are weary in the winter. One should try to live in the unlimited, clear, spiritual sky." Verse 5. The evening in the rainy season is dark all around. There is no sight of the twinkling stars on the horizon or the pleasing moon. They are covered by clouds, and the insignificant glowworms become prominent in the absence of the luminaries in the sky. So as there are seasonal changes within a year on Earth, there are changing ages in the whole cosmic manifestation. These changing ages are called yugas, and also they're described as being cosmic time periods. And the particular yuga that we're living in at the moment is called Kali Yuga, and this is compared to the rainy season of the universe. Because just like in the rainy season there are many difficulties, similarly there are many difficulties that take place in this damp age of Kali. Now you have to remember this is describing the rainy season in India. Of course in Ireland you could say that every season is the rainy season, but that's another topic. Verse number 6. On hearing the sound of the torrential rains, the frogs come out of the mountain caves and begin to chant, like brahmacharis who chant the Vedic hymns by the order of any age of a godless civilization. Religious leaders who are responsible should not sit idly in their caves, but should come out among the people and show compassion to those with dampened spirits by educating them in the techniques of spiritual life. Verse 7. The small rivulets that almost dried up during the months of May and June. Is there a couple of seats for our guests? You can please take a seat. Make yourself comfortable. Could you all move along one so we can make some space? Please, come and sit down. Just move. Okay, move that way. Yeah. Welcome. Verse number 7. The small rivulets that almost dried up during the months of May and June now begin to overflow their banks, like upstarts that suddenly overflow the limits of expenditure. This reminds me of a nice verse from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 70. Apuryamanam machalam pratishtam samudram apaprapashanti yadvat tadvat kamajam prapashanti sarve shashanti mapnoti nakamakami. And the translation of that verse is that a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So in other words, this verse is encouraging us to go within ourselves and not allow ourselves to overflow with desires that can never be fulfilled. Verse 8. Some nice peonies. The colourful greenery of the newly grown grass, the seasonal flowers, the frogs' umbrellas, the butterflies, and the other variegatedness of the rainy season perfectly represent a well-to-do family absorbed in vanity over their personal assets. The commentary to this verse points out that at this time of the year, the rainy season in India, which corresponds to the summer season here in Ireland, so the rainy season is going on in India at this time. Despite there being so many gorgeous displays of seasonal flowers, we should not forget that everything in this world comes and goes. Nothing is permanent. Material assets are like those seasonal flowers. Either the flowers wither or the gardener himself goes away. That is the law of nature. Verse number 9. A picturesque scene of green paddy fields means rice fields, enlivens the heart of the poor agriculturalist, but it brings gloom to the face of the capitalist who lives by exploiting the poor farmers. It's interesting to note that Prabhupada wrote this Light of the Bhagavata over 60 years ago, and of course this is the verses from the Bhagavatam, which are written 5,000 years ago. But the themes and the topics that are quite topical, especially for this age, this damp age of Kali. Prabhupada writes in his commentary, agriculture is the noblest profession. It makes society happy, healthy, wealthy and honest. But large-scale commerce and industry established by greedy capitalists entice the poor agriculturalists away from the land to the hellish industrial towns with the hope of earning more money. But one should never forget that one cannot produce rice and wheat in big iron factories. These things are provided by God. So you see that there's the farmers there in their beautiful green rice field, sitting and enjoying themselves. And there's the grumpy industrialist thinking how he can exploit the people. And he's being attended by his mischievous looking assistants. Verse number 10. Just as a living being attains a transcendently attractive form by rendering service to Lord Hari, similarly, all the inhabitants of the land and the water assume beautiful forms by taking advantage of the newly fallen water. Excuse me. Prabhupada writes in his commentary, we have practical experience of this, writes Srila Prabhupada, with our students in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Before becoming students, they were dirty looking, although they had naturally beautiful personal features. But due to having no information of Krishna consciousness, they appeared very dirty and wretched. Since they have taken up Krishna consciousness, their health has improved, and by following the rules and regulations, their bodily luster has increased. When they are dressed in saffron-coloured cloth with tilak on their foreheads and beads in their hands and on their foreheads, they look exactly as if they come directly from Vaikuntha. Verse 11. In the rainy season, when the rivers swell and rush to the ocean, and as the wind blows the waves about, the ocean appears to be agitated. Similarly, if a person engaged in the mystic yoga process is not very advanced in spiritual life, he can be affected by the modes of nature and thus will be agitated by the sex impulse. Prabhupada writes that just as oil and water do not mix, similarly sex and spiritual life are incompatible. Verse 12. The mountains, although being struck by torrents of rain during the rainy season, are not shaken, just as those whose hearts are dedicated to the transcendental personality of Godhead are never disturbed, even when harassed by great misfortune. So there is an analogy being made here. The devotees of God are compared to high mountains, which are never agitated in any way, even when struck by powerful torrents of rain in the rainy season. We should therefore be just like the tolerant mountains and remain standing despite so many inconveniences that may come our way. You see some long grasses on the road. Similarly, in this age, the transcendental scriptures are not properly studied by the Brahmanas. Being covered by the effects of time, the scriptures are practically lost, and it becomes very difficult to understand them or follow them. Verse 14. The lightning becomes unsteady in its friendship, failing to remain faithfully in any one of the clouds, although they are the friends of the entire world. Just as lusty women do not remain steady even in the company of men who possess excellent qualities. Prabhupada writes in his commentary that in the material world, a man requires a woman and a woman requires a man. When they are combined, they should live peacefully in Krishna consciousness and should not be restless, like the lightning flashing from one group of clouds to another. Verse 15. In the midst of the thunder in the cloudy sky, there appears a rainbow that has no string. Its appearance is compared to the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or his servants, in the midst of the material atmosphere. Prabhupada explains in his commentary to this verse that by his inconceivable energy, the Supreme Personality of Godhead can appear and disappear in this world just like a rainbow which appears and disappears without being affected by the roaring thunder and the cloudy sky. The Lord is eternally the biggest of the big and simultaneously the smallest of the small. The living beings who are his parts and parcels are the smallest of the small, and he is the biggest of the big as the absolute truth, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse 16. At night, by the grace of the moonlight, the clouds in the sky can be seen moving. Yet, the moon itself appears to be moving, just as a living being appears to be moving because of false identification with matter. I'm sure you're all familiar with that phenomena. You go out on a night when there's clouds blowing in the sky and the moon is visible. You can stand and look up and it appears that the moon is moving. Of course the moon isn't moving. The moon is far away from the clouds and the moon is fixed in its own orbit, but illusion presents a scene in which the moon appears to be moving. A living being, therefore, should not float with the misconception of the temporary body. He must always know himself to be transcendental to the bodily identity. This is the path of knowledge, and complete knowledge fixes the living being in the orbit of spiritual activities. And there's the moon, you can see right over the top. Verse 17. When the clouds appear in the sky, the peacock begins to dance in ecstasy, just as a sincere soul becomes overwhelmed with joy on the appearance of a saint at his house. Srila Prabhupada writes that it is the duty of the saints and sages to enlighten the fallen souls, and reciprocally it is the duty of the householder to receive the saints and sages cordially as the peacock dances in ecstasy at the presence of clouds in the sky. The fire of threefold miseries experienced by the materialistic men can be extinguished only by the cloud of mercy of the saints and sages, who can pour down the water of transcendental messages to put an end to the miseries of the householders. Verse 18. Many plants and creepers that were almost dead during the months of April and May are now visible again in various forms, for they are nourished by their roots in the moist earth. These numberless plants and creepers resemble persons who dry up in severe penances for some material gain, but then achieve their objectives and become luxuriously fat, nourished by sense enjoyment. Prabhupada explains this verse in his commentary. He says that just like the seasons come and the seasons go, the entire cosmic creation also comes and goes in its manifestations and non-manifestations. Here, this creation with the seed-like spiritual beings is being compared to creepers and plants that appear during the rainy season and gradually vanish when the season is over. Verse number 19. A crane stands on the edge of a pond that is always disturbed by flowing water, mud, and stones. The crane is like a house. It is disturbed in the shelter because of too much attachment does not change. Those of us who are too attached in the material world have to suffer like the crane. Prabhupada describes this in his commentary to this verse. He says that unfortunately, for want of sufficient culture of this spirit, the materialistic man always sticks to this false place despite all its. It is said that a man give up the order of his household at the age of 50. But in this age, in this era of ignorance, even an old man wants to rejuvenate bodily functions, put on artificial teeth, and make a pretense of youthful life, even on the verge of death. Crane-like politicians especially are too much attached to the false prestige of position and rank, and so they always seek re-election, even at the fag end of life. These are some of the symptoms of an uncultured life, unquote. How true. Verse number 20. Fierce torrents of rain break over the strands and the partition walls of the paddy field, the rice field, These disturbances resemble those created by the seasonal components of the standard principles of the Vedas who are influenced by this age of Kali. In other words, just like the walls of the rice field and the strand of the river are distorted by the onslaught of the rainy season, you can see there the waves are flooding the rice field and knocking things over. Similarly, in this disturbed age of Kali, spiritual teachings are being adulterated and distorted by the heavy rains of atheism. Verse 21. The wind carries the clouds to different parts of the globe, and the clouds distribute rains to the satisfaction of the people in general. Just as rich kings and merchants distribute their accumulated wealth inspired by religious priests. Prabhupada writes in his commentary that in this age of Kali, when a slight difference of opinion leads to quarrel, even to the extent of riots, it is the duty of the intelligent, the Brahmanas, to selflessly guide them in spiritual cultivation, just as the wind carries the clouds to other places to pour water. Verse 22. After the complete rainy season, the forests of Vrindavan were full of fruits, like dates and blackberries ripening on the trees and bushes. Lord Sri Krishna, along with his elder brother Sri Baladeva and other cowherd boys of the vicinity, entered the beautiful forest, accompanied by the cows, to display transcendental pastimes with his eternal friends. So spiritual life is personal. And the absolute personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, out of his causeless and limitless mercy, descends from the spiritual kingdom and displays his personal pastimes at Vrindavan, which is the replica of the Krishna Loka planet in the spiritual sky. Vrindavan is the most sacred place within the cosmic universe, and people seeking to achieve spiritual emancipation by entering the kingdom of God may make a home at Vrindavan. Verse 23. The cows that follow the Lord within the forest move slowly because of their heavy milk-laden udders. But when the Lord called them by their specific names, they at once became alert, and as they hastened toward him, their milk bags overflowed and poured milk on the ground because of affection for the Lord. Krishna is a transcendental cowherd, and his cows are called Kamadhenus. And those cows themselves are naturally devotees of God, devotees of Krishna. Prabhupada explains in his commentary on this verse that all of us, living beings here in the material world, are also natural devotees. And we are all originally Krishna conscious lovers of the Lord. But our affection for the Lord is submerged within us. He gives a very nice example. He says that the affection for God is covered over by the mode of ignorance, but spiritual culture can revive our natural affection for the living being. Just as the ingredients of fire are already present in safety matches. So the ingredients of fire are already there in the matches. All that is required is some mild friction and fire is ignited. Similarly, he says that our natural affection for the Lord has to be revived by a little spiritual culture. So spiritual culture is the friction required to ignite our dormant God consciousness, just like you strike, match, on the matchbox. Verse 24. When the Lord entered the forest of Vrindavan, all the inhabitants of the forest, both animate and inanimate, were eager to receive him. He saw that the flowers of the forest, all fully blooming, blossoming, were weeping in ecstasy, honey flowing down their petals. The waterfalls on the hilly rocks were gladly flowing, and one could hear sweet sounds from the caves nearby. Verse 25. The Lord reciprocated the feelings of the inhabitants of the forest of Vrindavan. When there was rainfall, the Lord took shelter at the feet of the trees, the caves, and enjoyed the taste of different fruits, his eternal associates, the cowherd boys. He played with them, sat with them, and ate fruits with them. So God is a person, and we are also persons, eternally. Verse 26. The Lord enjoyed in the company of Lord Baladeva. That's Krishna there, with the blue complexion, and that's Krishna's brother, with the white complexion, wearing a blue turban. And the other cowboys were also there. Sometimes they sat together on the same stone slab. While sitting, they ate simple foods like rice, dal, vegetables, bread, and curd, which they had brought from their homes, and which they shared in friendly exchanges. Prabhupada explains in his commentary that God actually never becomes hungry, but he mercifully eats the food that is offered to him by his devotees in sincere affection for the love of his devotees. This is another secret, open secret in Bhakti Yoga. Verse 27. After good rains, the grazing ground for the animals was full of green pasture, and both the bulls and the cows sat down on the grass, fully satisfied. The cows, followed by their calves, appeared tired of grazing because of full milk bags. Calmly and quietly, the cows and the calves rested and ruminated, chewing their cud. So Krishna, by his personal example, taught us the importance of cow protection, which is meant for all human beings all over the universe, not just in India. Prabhupada writes in this connection that the killing of cows by human society is one of the grossest suicidal policies. Those who are anxious to cultivate the human spirit must turn their attention first towards the question of cow protection. You may recall that the famous Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, who was also a very strict vegetarian, he wrote, "We are the living graves of murdered beasts, slaughtered to satisfy our appetites. We never pause to wonder at our feasts. If animals like men can possibly have rights. We pray on Sundays that we may have light to guide our footsteps on the path we tread. We're sick of war. We do not want to fight. The thought of it now fills our hearts with dread, and yet we gorge ourselves upon the dead. Like carrion crows, we live and feed on meat, regardless of the suffering and pain we cause by doing so. If thus we treat defenseless animals for sport or gain, how can we hope in this world to attain the peace we say we are so anxious for? We pray for it over hecatombs of slain to God, while outraging the moral law. Thus, cruelty begets its offspring, war." Verse 28. The fully beautiful scenery after the rainy season was attractive to the eyes of everyone. including Sri Krishna's cause of all causes. Prabhupada writes in his commentary that we should always appreciate the creative energy of the Supreme Lord, beautiful nature, even though material and therefore temporary, is always full of the glories of the Creator. The temporary creation is also a relative truth. It is a fact. It is in fact the temporary picture of the eternal creation. The forgetful soul has no information of the spiritual creation, known as the Sanatana Dharma, but the temporary creation gives us an idea of this original creation. The devotees of the Lord therefore make the best use of the bad bargain by utilizing the temporary creation in the service of the Lord. Verse 29. Thus the rainy season came to an end. The autumn began, and there were no more clouds in the sky. All the reservoirs of water became crystal clear, and the wind was no longer forceful. Lord Krishna, along with his elder brother Lord Baladeva, lived at Vrindavan in this auspicious season. Verse 30. In autumn, all the reservoirs of water become enriched with growing lotuses. The muddy water again becomes normally clear and decorated, just as fallen, conditioned souls once more become spiritually enriched in devotional service. Commentary. We should not be disappointed in our muddy life of material existence. For as soon as we voluntarily take to the devotional service of the Lord, our whole life becomes clear, like water in autumn. Devoid of our relationship with God, our life is barren, but as soon as the muddy mind is cleared by spiritual association or cultivation of the human spirit, the threefold miseries of material life are at once cleared off. Thus the lotus of knowledge gradually fructifies, and this gradual process of development ushers in transcendental bliss. Verse 31. The four prominent features of autumn are that there is no water in the sky, the weeds that grew here and there in the rainy season all wither away, the muddy roads dry up, and the ponds of water become crystal clear. These four features of the autumn atmosphere are compared to the four orders of life. Verse 32. The beautiful white clouds, free from all burdens of water distribution, float in mid-air like mendicants, freed from all family responsibilities. So there's a beautiful mendicant, free from all responsibilities other than to enlighten us in spiritual culture. Verse 33. There are waterfalls flowing from the hills of the forest, but sometimes water does not flow from them. So the waterfalls are not like ordinary rain. They are compared to great reformers who speak or do not speak as the time requires. Verse 34. Small pools of water accumulate during the rainy season, and in the autumn they gradually dry up. The little creatures playing in those small pools do not understand that their days are now numbered and will end very soon. Thus they are like foolish men who, not caring for the nearing day of their death, become absorbed in the so-called enjoyment of family life. So there we are, swimming around in our little pool. Forgetting the purpose of life, we think that our little pond is everything. But death is coming. The water is evaporating. Watch out, little fishes. Watch out. Verse 35. When the small pools of water become too hot because of the scorching heat of the autumn sun, the poor small creatures with their many family members suffer terribly, just as poor households with too many family members suffer economic strains and yet go on begetting children because of uncontrolled senses. The scorching heat of the autumn sun is here compared to materialistic family life based on sex. Prabhupada writes that spiritual culture means pursuing a better engagement in life. Quote, when a man engages in such cultural life, the desire for mating automatically abates, and the sufferings of uncontrolled family life are mitigated without artificial means like birth control or abortion. The attention of a human being, therefore, should be drawn to the cultivation of the human spirit, for this will gradually protect him from all sorts of discomfiture and elevate him to a higher status of life for real and eternal enjoyment in personal contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Verse 36. With the progress of the autumn season, the moist earth and muddy places begin to dry up, and the green vegetation begins to fade. This drying up and fading resembles the gradual disappearance of the false sense of affinity and ego. Verse 37. With the inauguration of the autumn season, the rough sea becomes calm and quiet, just like a philosopher after self-realization, who is no longer troubled by the modes of nature. Srila Prabhupada writes in his commentary that according to the Varnashram principle, it is compulsory that one retire after the age of 50 without considering other circumstances. He gives the example that business offices close at a fixed hour, no matter what balance of work remains. Similarly, after the age of 50, one must retire from the active external life and devote himself to introspective cultivation of the human spirit. This retirement, he says, must be compulsory so that foolish old men will no longer disturb the peaceful progress of spiritual culture. In the modern democratic government, now remember Prabhupada wrote this over 60 years ago, in the modern democratic government, no one should be elected after the age of 50. Otherwise the storm of the ocean of nescience cannot be stopped to allow ships and boats to sail back to Godhead. The greatest enemies of progressive spiritual culture and human society are the old fossils of political parties who are blind themselves and who try to lead other blind men. They bring about disaster in a peaceful human society. Verse 38. After the rainy season, the farmers begin to rebuild the partitioning walls of the paddy field so that the water will be conserved, just as yogis try to use their conserved energy for self-realization. Commentary. Prabhupada writes, human life is an opportunity to understand this cosmic harmony, and therefore our conserved energy, which is likened to the conserved water in the rice field, must be used for this purpose only. Verse 39. In the autumn, there is a gulf of difference between the day and the night. During the day, the extreme heat of the sun is unbearable, but at night, the moonlight is extremely soothing and refreshing. Similarly, Lord Sri Krishna is soothing for both the gopis, the cowherd girls, and the mundane man in illusion who accepts the body as the soul. Prabhupada explains that by the regular practice of Bhakti Yoga, this will lead the devotee to the plane of intense love for the Lord, and and that is a single qualification by which the conditioned soul is allowed to re-enter the eternal life and bliss in the kingdom of God. Verse 40. In the clear autumn sky, the twinkling stars appear brighter and brighter, just like a transcendentalist. Just like a transcendentalist's clear vision of the purpose of the Vedas. Verse 41. In the clear sky of autumn, the beautiful moon among the beautiful stars becomes the sign of all eyes, just as Lord Sri Krishna is the central attraction in the Vrishni dynasty, or in the family of Yadu. Prabhupada explains that the appearance and disappearance of the Lord are similar to the appearance and disappearance of the sun. The sun is first seen on the eastern horizon, but that does not mean that the sun is eastern. The sun is fixed in its own orbit, and it neither rises nor sets. But because we first see the eastern horizon, we may say that the sun rises side. Similarly, the appearance of God in some particular family does not mean that he is limited by obligations to that family. He is fully independent and may appear and disappear anywhere and everywhere because he is also baby. Verse 42. At night in autumn, the atmosphere is pleasant because it is neither very hot nor very cold. The mild wind blowing through the gardens of fruits and flowers in Vrindavan appeared very much pleasing to all but the gopis, who were always overtaken by heartfelt sorrow in the absence of Krishna. Here we see the gopis looking for Krishna. Verse 43. In the autumn season, all the birds, beasts and men become sexually disposed. There's some creatures down there, deer and crane, become sexually disposed, and the bull, the stag, the male bird, the man and other male creatures forcibly impregnate their sex. A similar impregnation takes place as a result of devotional service to the Lord. Prabhupada explains that during the mating season, animals naturally become pregnant by nature's arrangement. Similarly, in the parents of those children, maybe we should just close this off. Similarly, when transcendental knowledge is transmitted by a qualified teacher into the ear of the receptive student, the student becomes fully enlightened. Verse 44. In the autumn season, all the reservoirs of water are full of lotus flowers. There are also flowers that resemble the lotus, but are of a different class. Among them is a flower called Kumuda. When the sun rises, all the flowers except the Kumuda blossom. Similarly, lotus-like men take pleasure in the advent of a responsible king, but men who are like Kumuda do not like the existence of a king. Prabhupada describes in his commentary that previously there were kings, but then the kings were kicked out and democracy was introduced. But in democracy, the democratic leaders, so-called supreme executive officers, are just like quasi-kings themselves. He says, quote, the president, the ministers, the deputy ministers, the secretaries, the assistant secretaries, the private secretaries, the undersecretaries, no one is trained to look after factual interests of the people. In a so-called democratic government, corruption is even more rampant than in an autocracy or monarchy. Verse 45. After the new grains were cut and brought home from the paddy fields, the people began to observe the Navana ceremony everywhere in the presence of the Lord as Sri Krishna and Baladeva. Prabhupada explains that according to Vedic culture, learned men consider all natural products, such as grains, flowers, and milk, to be God sent. These things cannot be produced in a factory. Verse 46. The merchants, preachers, kings, and students who were confined to home during the 4 months of June, July, August, September, that's the rainy season in India, we're right in the middle, began to flow out and attain success in life, just as perfected souls attain the required body as soon as they leave the present one. Verse 47. From the transcendence, which is called Krishna Loka, there emanates a glowing effulgence that resembles the tail of a comet. This glowing effulgence is unlimited, immeasurable, and unfathomable. Within this effulgence there are innumerable glowing planets, each of them self-luminous. Somewhere a limited part of that glowing effulgence is covered by material energy, just as a part of the sky is covered by a cloud. Within this material energy there are innumerable universes. In every universe there are innumerable material planets, and the Earth is one of these planets. Thus we can understand what an insignificant part of the entire cosmos is this globe on which we live. And verse 48, our final slide. The moon or Chandra Loka is one of the 4 places of residence for the demigods. Beyond Manasa Lake is Sumeru Mountain. On the eastern side of this mountain is the planet Devadani, where Indra resides. On the southern side is the planet known as Samyamani, where Yamaraj resides. And on the western side is the planet known as Nimlochani, the residence of Vayu, the demigod who controls the wind. And on the northern side of the mountain is the moon, which is also known as Vibhavari. Prabhupada describes in his commentary that men with developed consciousness do not waste time making excursions, real or imaginary, to the moon. Such intelligent persons do not endeavour to achieve temporary sense enjoyment, rather they apply their conserved energy for the sake of spiritual cultivation. So this brings us to the end of our summing up. Today we engaged in a meditation on spiritual truths in nature. We have heard how nature itself, as well as the whole cosmic creation, has its original counterpart in the spiritual world. We discussed how the order and patterns which we see set about in nature are intentionally designed to illustrate spiritual truths. The existence of nature and its intricate balance is proof for any honest man of the existence of the Supreme Being, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. This material world is but a reflection of the pure spiritual world from which the light of the Bhagavata emanates. Light of the Bhagavata slide. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything to add, subtract, any comments, any doubts? Yes, sir.
Do we wish to know how this Srimad Bhagavad was narrated and where and how it came to be?
Well, it's a big subject.
It's about 3 or 4 minutes. I can, if you would like to know where it came from.
Where the Srimad Bhagavatam is coming from? What would you like to say?
When the Kali was coming, you know the Yugas.
Yes.
The Hindus, Indian context we talk about.
Right.
So after Lord Yudhishthir left and his successor Lord Parikshit took over the empire, he was the grandson of Arjuna,
Yes.
son of
Yes.
Abhimanyu.
Yes. Yes.
Then during the end of his rule, he found that Kali entering.
Yes.
He was the lord of the earth, so Kali asked him, so where should I go?
Yes.
You are the lord of the earth, please tell me where to start. So Parikshit, the learned king, he said, go into the gold. Gold is where all the ills and the evil is.
Correct.
So Kali went into the gold and the king was wearing the gold crown. So the first person to be affected by Kali was Parikshit himself. He was hunting. He happened to come across a sage who was in meditation. He asked for water. The sage didn't give him water. There was a dead snake lying somewhere. Learned king, that dead snake around the king, around the sage's neck, and left. The sage's son comes to know he curses him that within 7 days he will die of the bite of a snake.
Correct.
Then Lord Parikshit comes to know of it. Now he says what to do these 7 days. He calls all his learned, consorts of the court. So everybody advises him something or the other. Finally, he lands up with Rishi Vedyas. He says, with the 7 days is what takes the entire knowledge of the universe. So you gain this knowledge before you die. He said, where do I find the person who will give me this knowledge? He said, go walk up to the river Saryu. You are a great learned king. You would know who's got the knowledge. Who will be able to give it to you. So the king walks. He finds a man naked, rolling in sand, jumping around. And Lord Parikshit falls at his feet. You are the man. Enlighten me. How do you know that I'm the man? You don't even know me, and I'm just without any clothes on, and I'm rolling around. He said, no, you are the one who has full knowledge, you are the enlightened one.
Correct. So then Parikshit sat down and heard on the banks of the river Ganges, and the recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam.
Who was this Shukdev? Shukdev ji was a person, son of Lord Vedyas.
So it's a big story. We'll have to finish. But in summary, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is the most important function. It is described in the process of bhakti. There are five most important items in the process of bhakti yoga. Nam Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, Mathura Vas, Sri Murti Shraddha 7, and Nam Kirtan, Bhagavata Shravan, Mathura Vas, and associations with the devotees. So here every Sunday we have a program. We discuss some Krishna Katha. You will also be interested to know that during the week, the recitation of Bhagavatam every evening, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. The Srimad Bhagavatam is recited here. At the temple. This recitation of Bhagavatam takes place from what time? 6:30. From 6:30 till 7:30. So you can get that opportunity to hear the one of Bhagavatam being recited. The moment we're up to the third canto, and Sriman Amanda Kurma is made a vow that he keep reciting Bhagavatam. I'm not sure if you made that vow, but I'm encouraging you to finish the whole Bhagavatam. And that is a unique opportunity to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from the lips of those persons who are following in the footsteps of the great Acharyas. So we invite you to attend recitation of Bhagavatam. You can also obtain your own Srimad Bhagavatam. We have actually whole Srimad Bhagavatam is available at the moment in English translation, word for word. And we've got a special deal, haven't we? Is that right, Manu? What's the?
We have a full set for €225.
225 euros for the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, which is how many volumes?
It is is 18.
18 volumes, very big box. And you'll have to have a special bookshelf in your home for it. But anyone that establishes the Srimad Bhagavatam in their home becomes Vaikuntha. The home becomes non-different to the spiritual world. So hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, having Srimad Bhagavatam in your home is a very, very auspicious thing to do. So we encourage you to take up this Krishna consciousness process. Come here on Sundays, chant with us. Come here during the week, hear Srimad Bhagavatam. There's also Kirtan during the week. What nights? Tuesday 6:30. And we also have many festivals that come from time to time. Manu Prabhu will explain to you some of those festivals coming up after our Arati. Now we're going to have some Kirtan and an Arati ceremony offered to Sri Panchatattva, offering incense, lamps, etc., all sorts of auspicious items. We encourage you to chant. Actually, we can open up those curtains now and let some light and air in. I feel like a cave. We can tie them up at another time. And we invite you all to chant with us. So, Hare Krishna, and thank you for coming.
Hare